This video is about the Magistracies and the Cursus Honorum, elected political positions in ancient Rome. The Cursus Honorum it translates as the run of honours, and this was a chain of elected positions for Roman politicians to go through, at each step acquiring more experience. The idea was that by the time an individual became consul, they had a substantial wealth of experience in government in other positions. You could only take a particular position at a particular age. So let's have a look at the ladder there on the right, which is good a representation as any. The first position on the Cursus Honorum was that of Quaestor, and you could only take that position from the age of 30 forwards. The idea was that you would spend the first 10 years of your public life either serving in the military and acquiring military experience, foreign policy experience, or you would spend 10 years working in Rome's law courts, gaining legal experience. Whichever route you took, by the time you reached the age of 30, when you qualified to take this position of Quaestor, you were an experienced individual. After Quaestor, the next position is AEDILE, which you could take at the age of 37, PRAETOR at the age of 40, and the top position in Rome, you could only hold that from the age of 43, and that was the position of consul. All of these positions were held for just 1 year. The merits or not of this particular system, the 12-month appointment, you can do your own thinking on. Okay, let's have a look at step 1 on the ladder, Quaestor. 20 were appointed. They looked after the public finances. A couple may have been posted overseas to look after finances in the provinces. Occasionally, and this is the bit which for some reason always sticks in my head, although I'm not sure it was it's not a rule that I think was commonly used, but occasionally we have records that they investigated murders. So I always think of the Quaestor as a sort of Miss Marple sort of character. The key responsibility of the Quaestor was the administration of public funds to higher ranking officials. At the end of the 12-month period of being a Quaestor, if you chose never to hold another public office in Rome, you could be a senator for the rest of your life, because at the end of your year you qualified as a senator, and the only way to step down from being a senator was to die. More or less, you could, I guess, give up your position as a patrician and become a tribune of the plebs or something. But most of them, once you were a senator, you were there until you died. So for 1 year's service as Quaestor, that's a pretty big reward. As AEDILE, you had 3 primary functions. The first one is to look after the city, the second one to look after trade or provisions, and the third responsibility is to look after games, public celebrations. The notes on the screen come from Cicero, or Cicero, as I still am not able to bring myself to say on a regular basis. I am going to read them out because this is a huge job, and the number of responsibilities is really quite breathtaking. So, you would look after the repair and preservation of temples, sewers and aqueducts, street cleansing and paving, regulations regarding traffic, dangerous animals and dilapidated buildings, precautions against fire, superintendence of baths and taverns, enforcement of sumptuary laws, punishment of gamblers and moneylenders, the care of public morals generally. How do you look after public morals generally? Including the prevention of foreign superstitions and the registration of meretrices. Meretrices were prostitutes. Number two, you had to look after the investigation of the quality of the articles supplied and the correctness of weights and measures. This is important when it comes to the exchange of precious metals, precious gems, grain, which we come on to next. The purchase of grain for disposal at a low price in case of necessity. Rome did not produce enough grain to feed itself, so it was absolutely reliant on a trade in grain with other provinces and non-occupied Roman territories. Finally, you must superintend and organize public games as well as those given by themselves and private individuals, such as at funerals, at their own expense. Ambitious persons often spent enormous sums in this manner to win the popular favour with a view to official advancement. The most famous aedile was Julius Caesar, and famously he got himself into vast amounts of personal debt paying for public games. When he was aedile, he wanted to curry huge favour with the Roman people, to build up his popularity, to make his rise through Roman politics more likely. But at the end of his year, he was pretty close to being bankrupted. Praetor. Praetor was mostly concerned with looking after law and legal affairs in Rome. They would exercise some powers of imperium. This is the power of the state. Originally there was just one, the Praetor Urbanus, the praetor of the city, and he would oversee all of Rome's law courts. But a second praetor, the Praetor Peregrinus, was appointed to look after legal matters involving foreigners. Clearly somebody with an understanding of foreign customs, foreign laws. That's a very specialist position. 4 more were appointed to govern in the provinces. I don't know why it says all 8 might take provincial positions after they're in office, because from what I've just said, it suggests there were only 6. No, there were 8. And at the end of their year in office as praetor, they were eligible to go and become a governor of a province, which is a lucrative position in the Roman Republic. Lastly, consul. The highest position in the Roman Republic. 2 were appointed every year, the idea being that if 2 men were in the highest position, that meant that no one man had absolute power. This was a definite reaction against monarchy and the crimes of Tarquin the Proud in 510 BCE. So when the Republic was formed, they made the decision to have 2 men in the highest position of the state. They presided over the Senate, which meant they effectively decided what matters of government were prioritized, and also they could command armies when Rome went to war. It's a big deal. It's the highest position in Rome. As you go up the Cursus Honorum, you can you would have lictors appointed to you. That's the bodyguard, and the higher the prestige of the position, the more lictors you had. So the consul walked around when he went about his daily business in Rome. He would have 24 men, 24 lictors in his bodyguard. A praetor would have 12, an aedile would have 6, and a quaestor would have to somehow fend for himself. The lictors were easy to identify because they would carry with them these bundles of rods or sticks with an axe in the middle. You can see the illustration on the screen there. And these were called fasces. These were signs of power, and obviously the more of these you had around you, the more power you had. So it's a very symbolic demonstration to the Roman public of who has power. Fasces is still with us, sadly, in the form of the word fascism or fascism as we would have it nowadays. What other positions were there in Rome? Censors. Censors. 2 were elected every 5 years, and they were always former consuls. It was a primary function to count the number of people in Rome and its territories, to carry out the census. But they would also manage the membership and the numbers of men in the Senate. They could expel senators. So you didn't simply have the option of dying in office if you were a senator. And they awarded contracts for public works. So if Rome, for example, needed a new amphitheatre built, they would have to employ somebody to do it, and the censor would look after that. If you were not of a patrician class, if you were a plebeian, there was still a route into politics through this very significant position, the tribune of the plebs. You would be elected by the people. You had to be from the plebeian class yourself. And the idea was that the tribune of the plebs was empowered with a veto. Veto is the Latin for I forbid. And the tribune of the plebs had the power of veto over any laws coming out of the Senate. They could simply overrule them. So the idea was that the tribune of the plebs was a way of buffering the power of the Senate. The Senate couldn't just steamroller things that the people would not want for themselves. So in theory, this made the tribune of the plebs enormously powerful. But of course, corruption creeps in, and very, very often the tribunes of the plebs could be made to vote with the Senate on matters which might not have benefited the people the tribune of the plebs is alleged to be representing. That power of veto, by the way, the last line on the slide is worth mentioning. Power of veto over all other magistrates except the dictator, which we'll come back to. We nowadays think of the role of dictator as entirely negative. It's entirely associated with some of the most monstrous figures of the 20th century, and we regard it as a terrible position, essentially a tyranny. One man bestowed with absolute power. But in Rome, in the Republic especially, it was a functioning position in the Republic. It was a temporary office. A crisis would arise. One man would be appointed dictator. He would have absolute power, imperium, and he would deal with the crisis. And then when the crisis was dealt with, he would step away from the role of dictator. That was it. It was a temporary position to deal with a crisis. After Julius Caesar, you'll be amazed to hear, they abolished the role of dictator, because one of the things that Caesar did as dictator was appoint himself as dictator in perpetuity, forever. So, there's no skinny for this because there's just too much detail. Make sure you go back through, make sure you read over these positions, make sure you understand the distinctions between them. You do need to know this stuff for the exam. As usual though, if you have any questions, see me in class.